They were worshipped as gods, the rulers of the most powerful civilization on earth. Their monuments were built to last for eternity, and yet, in what feels like the blink of a historical eye, some of Egypt's most important pharaohs just vanished. Their names were chiseled off stone, their statues were smashed, and their legacies were systematically deleted from the history books. This wasn't some random accident, it was a calculated erasure, a conspiracy hatched at the highest levels of power. So, who would ever dare to kill a god, and how did they almost get away with it? What we're talking about here is a practice the Romans would later give a name to, Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory. But the Egyptians had perfected it centuries before them. This was way more than just vandalism. It was a targeted political and spiritual attack. You see, in the ancient Egyptian belief system, a person's name, their ren, was absolutely essential for them to survive in the afterlife. To speak the name of the dead was to make them live again. So, to erase that name was to condemn their soul to total oblivion, a second and final death. The methods were brutal and incredibly systematic. Crews of workers would descend on temples and tombs with a single mission: wipe a person from existence. They'd take chisels to the cartouches, those oval rings that held a pharaoh's name, and hammer them into dust. They'd smash statues, but not just randomly. They'd target the nose with precision, since Egyptians believed you needed a nose to breathe in the afterlife. Then the final insult. A new pharaoh would often just carve his own name right over the freshly erased one, stealing the monument, the glory, and the history for himself. This wasn't just rewriting history. This was an attempt to unwrite it. It was a way for a new ruler to make their own power legitimate by erasing anyone who stood in their way, even if that person was long dead. But in doing so, they created a series of historical cold cases, and the first one we need to look into involves the most infamous heretic in all of Egyptian history. His name was Akhenaten. Before he came along, Egypt worshipped a whole pantheon of gods, and the powerful priests of the main god, Amun-Ra, were at the top of the food chain. Akhenaten took the throne around 1353 BCE and changed everything. He declared there was only one true god, the Aten, which was represented as the life-giving disk of the sun. This was a revolution that shook Egypt to its very foundations. Akhenaten changed his own name from Amenhotep IV to honor his new god, and then launched a campaign to erase the old ones. He sent out workers to deface the temples of Amun and other gods, basically committing the exact same crime that would later be used against him. He abandoned the traditional capital city of Thebes and built a massive, glittering new city out in the desert called Akhetaten, the horizon of Aten, which we know today as Amarna. For almost 2 decades, all of Egypt was forced to worship a single god, and the pharaoh was his one and only prophet on earth. But that new world died right along with him. As soon as Akhenaten was gone, Egypt rushed to bring back the old ways. The backlash was swift and total. The pharaohs who came after, especially the general-turned-pharaoh Horemheb, launched a devastating campaign to make the world forget Akhenaten ever even existed. His city, Amarna, was abandoned to the desert sands, its stones carted off and reused for other buildings. His temples were torn down, his statues were shattered, and his name was meticulously scraped from every single official king list that later rulers put together. The erasure was so complete that for 3,000 years, it was like he'd never been. His tomb remains one of Egypt's great mysteries. While recent DNA studies strongly suggest that a body found in tomb KV55 is indeed Akhenaten, a definitive, undisputed burial has never been found. His queen, the legendary Nefertiti, also seemed to vanish from the record, and though recent finds have sparked new debate about her fate, her tomb is still one of history's most sought-after missing treasures. The condemnation was so absolute that later generations of Egyptians listed Akhenaten's successor as the pharaoh who came before him, effectively deleting that entire controversial chapter from their official history. The message was crystal clear. If you defy the gods, history itself will declare war on you. But it wasn't just religious heresy that could get you erased from history. Sometimes, just being a woman in a man's world was enough of a crime. That brings us to our second case file. The incredible Hatshepsut. Hatshepsut was not born to be pharaoh. She was the wife of Thutmose II, and when he died, she was named regent for her very young stepson, Thutmose III. But being a regent wasn't enough for her. In a move that was completely unprecedented, Hatshepsut claimed the title of pharaoh for herself, ruling as a king in her own right for more than 20 years. To make her power legitimate, she was often shown in the full regalia of a male pharaoh. We're talking the kilt, the crown, and even the traditional false beard. And you know what? She was brilliant at it. Her reign was an era of peace, prosperity, and some truly mind-blowing architectural projects. She wasn't a warrior queen. She was a builder and a diplomat who kicked off a golden age. So why on earth was she erased? Well, after she died, her stepson, Thutmose III, finally took his rightful place as the sole ruler. For the first 20 years of his reign, her legacy was left completely untouched. But then, late in his rule, the attack began. Her name and her images were chiseled away from the walls of her own temples. Her statues were smashed to bits and buried in pits. Her name was struck from the official king lists. For years, historians just assumed this was an act of personal revenge. A bitter stepson finally getting back at the stepmother, who kept him from power for so long. But the evidence suggests a colder, more calculated motive. The erasure wasn't a frenzied, angry attack. It was selective, and it happened decades after he took the throne. Today, most scholars believe the motive was political, not personal, though the debate continues. Thutmose III may have erased Hatshepsut to secure the throne for his own son. By erasing the precedent of a successful female pharaoh, he was restoring the traditional, unbroken male line of succession. It was a cold, political move to protect the future by deleting a powerful woman from the past. The campaign to erase Akhenaten didn't just stop with him. It created collateral damage, and its most famous victim is a name we all know today: Tutankhamun. King Tut was very likely Akhenaten's son. He took the throne as a young boy named Tutankhaten, but he quickly changed it to Tutankhamun, showing everyone he was bringing back the old gods. He moved the capital back to Thebes and started trying to repair the damage his father had caused. But his connection to the disgraced Amarna period was a stain he just couldn't wash away. The architects of the Great Erasure, like Pharaoh Horemheb, were determined to wipe that entire era from memory, and that meant that Tutankhamun and his immediate successor were on the chopping block too. Horemheb actually stole monuments built by Tutankhamun, carving his own name right over the boy kings. On the official king lists, Horemheb had his own reign recorded as starting right after Akhenaten's father, as if Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and had never even existed. And that's why, for thousands of years, King Tut was a nobody, a minor, forgotten king, whose short reign was intentionally scrubbed by the more powerful pharaohs who followed. But here's the beautiful irony. That very act of erasure is what ended up saving him. Because he was wiped from the records, his tomb was forgotten. And because it was forgotten, its location in the Valley of the Kings was lost to time, which allowed it to escape the looters who emptied out nearly every other royal tomb. His erasure became his salvation, preserving his incredible treasures for Howard Carter to stumble upon in 1922. But for all their elaborate conspiracies, the erasers ultimately failed. Their attempts to carve people out of history were foiled by the very thing they used to do it: stone. The Egyptian sands that buried Akhenaten's city also preserved it perfectly. The workers who smashed Hatshepsut's statues and threw the pieces into a pit accidentally created a time capsule for archaeologists who later found them and put them back together like a giant, divine jigsaw puzzle. The real key that unlocked all these lost stories came in the 19th century when Jean-François Champollion finally deciphered hieroglyphs. Suddenly, scholars could read the defaced inscriptions. They could see the faint outlines of the names that had been scraped away. They could compare different king lists and spot the suspicious gaps. At Hatshepsut's temple, they were confused by reliefs that seemed to show two male kings ruling together, until they realized one of them was a woman whose identity had been systematically attacked. But the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb was the final nail in the coffin for the ancient cover-up. It brought the entire forgotten Amarna period roaring back to life, forcing history to finally acknowledge the kings that Egypt had tried so desperately to forget. So, what do the stories of Akhenaten and Hatshepsut really tell us? They're a powerful reminder of how fragile memory can be, but also how incredibly resilient the truth is. They show us that history isn't just a dusty record of what happened. It's an active battlefield, where legacies are fought over, buried, and sometimes, against all odds, rediscovered. Pharaohs who held the power of gods tried to control the narrative forever. They tried to decide who would be remembered and who would be cast into total oblivion. They hammered names from stone and tore down monuments, thinking they could win one final victory over their rivals. But they completely underestimated the persistence of history. The ghosts they tried so hard to bury just refused to stay silent. Their whispers were preserved in the shattered stones and hidden tombs, waiting patiently for centuries until someone finally came along who was ready to listen. If you enjoy solving the mysteries of the past, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more dives into ancient conspiracies.